Good evening and welcome to One on One Nightly, live from 9:30 to 11 on Twitter and YouTube. Thank you for tuning in tonight. My name is Sam Davis, here alongside Mike Calamari. Alex Wolves is our producer for the evening. A lot of optimism, I'll say, here in New York. You got fans allowed back at Yankee Stadium, soon to be allowed at Citi Field. The weather, it's finally feeling like spring. It was beautiful today. Masters weekend right around the corner. I know we're going to get into that. I think that's the true sign of spring. But before I get myself here carried away a little bit, Mike, how you doing tonight?
Yeah, I'm doing great. I think we got a lot of sports to talk about, which is going to be fun. You know, national championship ended, and just as that's coming to a close, we got the baseball season and then the Masters this weekend. So yeah, I mean, it's gonna be a good show, and I think we got a lot to talk about.
Yeah, definitely. I mean, when I was just talking there, I didn't even mention the NBA. I didn't mention the Jets news. And of course, I didn't mention the national championship, which we'll get into here now. So on Monday night, Baylor defeated Gonzaga 86-70 to leave the Zags one game short of perfection. The game was quite frankly dominated by Baylor. They came out of the gates hot. They were up 9-0 early, and they led by 19 midway through the first half. And you got to give credit to the Gonzaga there. They were able to kind of stick around, hang in the game. They made it a 10-point deficit, I believe, at multiple times, both at halftime and a little bit here in the second half. But they couldn't really get any closer to that as Baylor just kept up that intensity all night. They shot really well, and they impressively ended up winning, obviously, by 16. So, Mike, my question here for you is, did Baylor win this game or did Gonzaga lose this game?
Yeah, I think Baylor won this game 100%, and I don't think it's really close. I mean, obviously Gonzaga didn't play their best basketball. I think they struggled mightily offensively, but that was really credit to Baylor's defense. I mean, they really had you at the top of the three-point line. They didn't let you penetrate inside the zone at all. And, I mean, Gonzaga couldn't find shots, but Baylor found every shot. I mean, it was almost like Baylor didn't miss a shot in the first half. And to Gonzaga's credit, they cut it within 10, and Baylor was playing the best basketball they had all season. It was 10-point game at halftime. And I was watching the game and I was like, you know what? This is where Gonzaga makes their run. But it was the same story as the first half, and Baylor just did it again in the second half. I don't think there's a team in college basketball that's beating Baylor during that game. I think even at their best, it's going to be tough to beat Baylor the way they played that game. So, I mean, as good as Gonzaga was, I really don't think they lost this game because of how they played. I think it was really Baylor who won it.
Yeah, it's funny that you say that because I feel like all year the talk on Gonzaga has been you could play your best game and still lose. And I feel like Baylor, that was the case in the national championship game. No matter how well you played against Baylor that night, it just felt like Baylor was going to win. I totally agree with you. I think Baylor definitely won this game. I think there's something to be said about the beginning of the game, and I mentioned this a little bit earlier this morning in our pre-production meeting. I just think Gonzaga was maybe not physically tired from the UCLA game in the Final Four, but maybe a little mentally tired from just a long game, very high stress, high intensity for the entire game, including overtime. That maybe the first couple minutes of the game, as I said, a 9-0 run for Baylor to start the game. Baylor was just obviously more intense, I guess you could say. They were just playing with a lot more energy, a lot more anticipation. But as I say that, I think Gonzaga fighting their way back to 10 points proves that Gonzaga really did also come to play. It just took a little bit longer for them to kind of get their feet under themselves and get started there. But once they did, I mean, they were able to kind of hang around at points, like I said. But that's when I think Baylor really won this championship game, was when Gonzaga, like you said, at halftime brought it to 10 points, and we thought, hey, this is, for as bad as Gonzaga played, or for as good as Baylor played in the first half, 10 points at halftime was the victory. And then from there, to start the second half, Baylor just came out with that same intensity. You could see it, especially in the offensive boards. I thought that was a big teller sign there. They were rebounding like crazy. They were getting a bunch of 50-50 balls, creating lots of turnovers. Just that intensity and that Baylor brought to the table, and just attitude, I just totally loved. And honestly, I was very impressed, because I thought going into this game, especially after the way Gonzaga played in beating UCLA, it was hard to think that anyone could beat Gonzaga. I'm going to be totally honest. I think going into the game, everyone was saying, this is Gonzaga's championship to lose. They're undefeated. They've been tested now. They played a really good game against a UCLA team that just did everything right, and they still found a way to win. For me, it was a little shocking to see Baylor come out of the gates like this. I mean, they're a very good team, but and a couple games away from being undefeated, but still, I was a little surprised. I don't know about you, Mike, but I was a little surprised for sure.
Yeah, I definitely was surprised. And you mentioned a couple of things there. First, like the offensive boards. I remember in the first half, it looked like Baylor was getting 2 or 3 chances on every time down the floor. And I think a lot of that was that I think Baylor has some size Gonzaga doesn't. And I think that helped Baylor. But at the same time, I think I agree with you. Baylor just looks like they had more in the tank than Gonzaga did. That's an emotionally draining win that Gonzaga had against UCLA. So it's tough to come off that, and you got to settle yourself down because you have such a high when you hit the game-winning shot, and you got to bring yourself down. And now you got to go play Baylor, who's, I think a lot of people had predicted Baylor, Gonzaga, that they were the two teams that were going to meet at the end. But I think one thing was really important. Gonzaga spent time tinkering the entire game on how to counter Baylor's offense. I mean, they had the man to start the game. Then they went to the zone, and it looked like it was showing success. They had to stop, then they had to score to cut it within 10 at half. And they were talking at the halftime show about, does Gonzaga stay with the zone? Do they go to the man? But the problem with the zone is that you really have to depend on the team struggling from outside at 3, because it's going to get hard to close out on shooters. So when Baylor kept on hitting shots, it's tough to beat a team that's going to hit every 3, even when you contest it. So I think that just goes to show you that Baylor really won this one. And I think Gonzaga had a very slow start, but they've had slow starts before. They had that in the entire season. They were a team that started off slow and then would make runs and blow you out. So the fact they weren't able to do that against this Baylor team, I think just shows you Baylor really won this one.
Yeah, I mean, some people are going to go out and argue, and I didn't see it too often, but I assumed it would be kind of an argument that Baylor comes from the Big 12. They're tested just about every week. They play a much tougher schedule than Gonzaga does. That's the reason why they beat this team. And to be honest, I don't agree with it. I would normally make that argument. I would normally be the one to say, yeah, Baylor was tested a lot more than Gonzaga was this season. But from watching the game, I don't think Gonzaga really played that poorly. I mean, they shot 51% from the field.
I mean, they shot better than Baylor did from the field. Just Baylor had 16 more looks. I mean,
yeah. I mean, exactly. And it's like the fact that, I don't know, like I know, Mike, I think you mentioned to me the stat about Gonzaga. You can say it here about them winning almost. I mean, it felt like, according to the stats, it seemed like Gonzaga would win that game against almost every opponent. Am I correct with that?
Yeah, it was the UCLA game. There was a shot stat that based on the shots UCLA took and what Gonzaga took, Gonzaga wins that game 98% of the time.
Yeah.
And that was the reason why it was so close. And I think with this Baylor game, we saw that Gonzaga was so successful from the field. It was just their inability to grab offensive rebounds and their inability to stop Baylor that they did not have enough time to be able to, I don't know, end up getting ahead of Baylor.
Yeah. And I think the bottom line here, I think just with Baylor, they were just more energized and they just played like it from the jump, obviously. And that's the biggest takeaway from the game. It's not that Gonzaga lost this game. It's not that Gonzaga wasn't tested enough all year, even though, maybe those things are true. Obviously, Gonzaga can play in a better conference. Baylor does play in a better conference than Gonzaga, but for me, that doesn't play as big of a role as, quite honestly, I expected it to, just because I think Baylor definitely surprised me with how they came out and played, how they came out and rebounded. Their defense was just stellar all night, forcing a lot of turnovers, like I mentioned. So for me, that was the biggest takeaway. It was definitely Baylor and how they played. And Gonzaga, I mean, you got to give them credit. You can't go this segment without giving Gonzaga some credit for the incredible year that they've had. I mean, not many teams can go undefeated for a full season and win it all. That's incredibly difficult to do. For that reason, I was a little doubtful of Gonzaga to win it all, just because I felt like to really get over that hump and win it all, being undefeated, I think that's just incredibly difficult. So many teams are coming for you week in and week out, and in the tournament especially. You can tell Baylor, I mean, they blew out Houston, and I'm sure that whole second half they're thinking, all right, we got Gonzaga. Now it's time, even though they hadn't even won the game yet, now it's time to really prove how good we are, and that's just exactly what they did.
Yeah, it's really crazy what happened. I mean, one thing that I find interesting is it feels like Gonzaga is getting closer and closer, but they just haven't been able to get it done yet. And I mean, my question would be to you, like, how much longer is it going to be? Is there a rush now next year that, I mean, it seems like they're getting closer and closer each year. I mean, how many times have they been a top 2 seed and they've fallen either before the Final Four or in this case at the national championship? And I think everyone's always been saying the conference, they barely get these big time programs. These other Power 5 schools, they don't play them as much. But I mean, when you're destroying USC in the Elite Eight, I mean, it's tough to knock this team for not getting competition. I mean, they beat almost every ranked opponent they play in the year. I mean, they beat every ranked opponent until Baylor. So I mean, I just find it interesting. I mean, is there a urgency now next season to finally get it done, or maybe just get back there at the very least?
Yeah, I think there's a little bit of an urgency, obviously, but I don't know, a lot of that pressure for me seems to be not necessarily a good thing, just because, I mean, Gonzaga, you have to look at the incredible year you have. You have to look at how well coached of a team they are, too. I mean, like you said, in this Baylor game, I really think this Gonzaga team was doing everything they can to try and find a way to get back in this game. And that starts with coaching as well. They were making adjustments and trying to figure out ways to get that lead from under 10 points. And they did stick around throughout the game to make it possible, but it was just too good of a Baylor team. I don't think the fault goes to Gonzaga. For that reason, I don't think there should be a ton of pressure on this team next season. But the other side of it thinks, well, I mean, they were undefeated. They had stars galore on this team, between Jalen Suggs and Drew Timme and Kispert. There's so many guys on this team that are just studs and very good athletes, very good players, that you got to think, if you can't win this year with this team, can you win ever? I don't know. It's a tough question. I can't answer it. I think they're always going to be good. They have been good for years. As long as Mark Few is the coach of that team, they're going to continue to be good. I don't think they should have anything to prove to anyone, because they had an unbelievable season and were just obviously a game short, which is unfortunate. But for me, I don't think you can ask for much more out of this team at all.
No, yeah, they'll definitely be back in it. I mean, you lose Suggs, I think that's going to be a big loss, but they'll retool, I think, and they'll be back. I mean, all in all, I think it was a really entertaining tournament. It's definitely different without no fans, but I mean, we had some of the best moments. I mean, that Gonzaga shot outside of the Villanova, North Carolina championship, I can't think of a better buzzer beater I've seen in a college basketball game. So the fact you get moments like that, I guess, is why March Madness is the greatest. So it's sad to see it go, but I think we got a great Final Four game, and the national championship, not as much. But I mean, to see Gonzaga and Baylor go at it, it's still entertaining. Yeah,
I just think I totally agree with you. Just having March Madness back was incredible. Just something that I think every sports fan missed so much last year during the height of the pandemic. Having that back, even with limited capacity with the fans, obviously in neutral sites, they weren't traveling. It was a different tournament. We knew it was going to be a different tournament, but it was still a very special one. That Final Four game was really the culmination of, I'd say, a very good tournament, very successful, and overall just awesome to have March Madness back. I totally agree. So next, we're gonna get into some local news of the week. Sam Darnold traded to the Carolina Panthers. We'll get into it next. Stick around on One Nightly. We'll be back after this break. Welcome back to One Nightly. Sam Davis and Mike Calamari back with you. Thank you for watching on YouTube and Twitter. On Monday, the Jets decided to trade Sam Darnold to the Carolina Panthers for a 6th-round draft pick in this year's draft and a 2nd and 4th rounder in 2022. Mike, you've now had a few days to kind of process this trade. So I'm going to ask you now, what do you think of the deal as Sam Darnold leaves New York?
I think it's a big win for the Jets. I really do. I think you get 3 draft picks. You can say, oh, they didn't get a 1st-round pick. They only got the 2nd and the 4th and then the 6th-round pick there too. But I still think get any picks for Sam Darnold to win. He is not a 1st-round player right now. I don't think anybody would, knowing what they know about Sam Darnold, spend a 1st-rounder. I don't think anyone would take a 2nd-rounder on him if you saw him in the draft. So on that alone, I think the Jets won this trade. And if you look at the Jets, you got a lot of picks on your hands now over the next couple of years. So that's also a win. And if I'm Carolina, I'm not really sure what they're thinking. Obviously, they see something in Sam Darnold. Who am I to say that he's not great, that maybe they see some potential in him? But From what I saw of Sam Darnold in New York, I'm not impressed. I do not see him really evolving into a starter that can lead a team into a playoffs. I think the best situation for him would have been a place like Pittsburgh, would have been a place for him where he can work under a quarterback already, maybe Atlanta with Matt Ryan, somewhere like that, because obviously he lacked leadership in New York and he wasn't able to lead that team anywhere. So a big win for the Jets. I like them getting the picks, and I'm interested to see what they can do in the draft.
Yeah, I don't know. I'm going to push back a little bit on what you're saying here. I'm a little less optimistic from the Jets' standpoint. I do understand your criticism of Sam Darnold. It is perfectly right and just. And I don't think he's definitely not the future for the Jets at the quarterback position. He's probably not the future at the quarterback position for the Panthers either, but we'll get into that. But my argument is that I'm a little nervous, I guess, with picking a quarterback at number 2 and really a future of your franchise, as the Jets seem to be placing very much importance on this pick and on this quarterback, whoever that may be. It could be Zach Wilson. It could be somebody else. We're not so sure. We'll get into that too. But for me, I think the Jets are very early on in the rebuilding stage. Obviously, new head coach after Gates. And to be honest, you need to improve a lot of positions on both sides of the ball. It isn't really just the quarterback position. And to me, this move to get Sam Darnold out of New York is basically saying, okay, we're going to take a quarterback high in the draft that we think is going to be someone to build this franchise around. That's how I take the move. That's how I take what the Jets are doing. I'm not sure. Obviously, I'm not in that organization, so I don't know for sure. Zach Wilson could be that guy. He could be that franchise quarterback to build around, but he also couldn't be. I mean, Sam Darnold, if I'm not mistaken, was taken in the first round, correct?
Yes, you are correct. Yeah.
Yes, he was. So that's exactly my point and almost a little bit of concern I have with taking another quarterback in the first round, kind of going out on a limb, no matter who it is. I mean, Zach Wilson has shown a lot and impressed a lot, and I'm not trying to disregard that because I think he surely can be a good quarterback in the NFL, but I can't guarantee he can be, and no one can guarantee he can be. And for that reason, I get a little, I guess, worried about building your franchise around a newly drafted quarterback when you're trading away your previous savior of the franchise, as it was Sam Darnold. So for me, that's where I'm a little worried about this from the Jets standpoint. I think there's a lot of rebuilding that needs to be done at all positions, and they'll continue to get better at some positions. And it's also about a new culture, which Robert Saleh will introduce to this team. All that's very important. But I feel like the Jets really need to hit on this quarterback pick, on this number 2 selection, and in the draft in general, because they do have a lot of picks, in order for this to be a success and for this trade to make sense.
Yeah, I get that. I mean, my question back to you. I mean, do you see Sam Darnold being the answer for the Jets ever?
No, and that's the thing is
then you got to trade him. I feel like because
right.
If you don't think he's the answer, then you got to get some return on him now. I mean, 2 years go down the line, and let's say some backup for the Jets starts catching fire, and now Darnold's the bench guy, the backup. You're not getting anything in return for him. So you get him out now, and listen, they could draft Zach Wilson, and he could stink. I really like Zach Wilson. I think he's gonna be good, but he could be Sam Darnold and just not perform. But in any year, I think this is the year to get a QB because we're not getting a class like this in a while. I mean, Sam Darnold's class is actually pretty good. I mean, you look back on it now, he happened to want to be the guys who's not good. But, I mean, I think that if you're going to get a QB, this is the draft to do it. And I think we both agree just now, Sam Darnold's not the answer.
Yes. Yeah. And I totally agree with that. And no, Sam Darnold is not the future. But for me, I think I prefer for a rebuilding franchise, kind of like a bridge quarterback situation, almost like a filler quarterback, somebody in there that's a decent player that can win your team a couple games. But if I'm being perfectly honest, the Jets win total next season doesn't really matter that much at all because this is the start of a rebuild. And sure, they're not going to win a lot of games. I mean, sure, it would be nice for the Jets to win 4 or 5 games. That would make them feel well. But in the scheme of things, it doesn't matter too much. For me, it's about rebuilding this team, and it's not just the quarterback position; it's everywhere. So that's why I think maybe more of a bridge quarterback or somebody to kind of like placehold for maybe a quarterback in free agency or a quarterback down the road that they really think is a centerpiece to build around. That's the route I would have preferred or maybe considered. But obviously, I get the other side of it because you're right. This is a really good draft class for the quarterback position. I mean, we're going to see quarterbacks go 1, 2, and 3 in the draft, probably, maybe even one,
Yeah.
2, 3, 4, which I think is incredible. That hasn't happened in a while. So that's a totally justified point. Is that this is a really good draft class, and you are getting a decent amount of picks in return, like you said. This is a good trade for the Jets from that standpoint. You're really helping. Like I keep saying, this is a rebuild. Well, those draft picks are going to help. Accumulating those draft picks and getting guys in the second round or even in the later rounds as well. Those are going to be the guys that are filling out your team. So overall, from that standpoint, I was a little critical of the move for sure. But at the end of the day, the Jets are getting draft picks. And I guess if you're a Jets fan, you just have to hope that Zach Wilson is your quarterback and is your guy to kind of build around in New York.
Yeah, I think that's important. I also think you have to consider the fact that with Gase leaving, it's hard to have a QB have to work with a new head coach. I mean, I think having a new head coach and a new QB makes sense. So if you get a QB in this draft, he is working with a new system. If you get Sam Darnold, I think it'd be hard for him to have to work with a new system. I think it could be done, but it's just not something you would want with a franchise. And that's another reason why I think it makes sense to get him out now. And picks are picks. Second, fourth, and sixth, I guess you can say, they're not top picks, but I'll take a second, fourth, and sixth over Sam Darnold any day of the week. I think you can find a better player there than Sam Darnold is.
Yeah, that's totally fair. And I mean, I want to say this too. For Sam Darnold, from a personal standpoint, I think this is a big trade for him, and I think it's a really good trade for him because he gets a totally fresh start. He gets a new team. He gets a better coach, and he gets better players around him. I mean, he gets Christian McCaffrey in the backfield to hand the ball off to. That must be nice as a quarterback, but also throw to. And then you have some pretty good receivers out there as well, DJ Moore and Robbie Anderson. Two decent receivers to throw to. I think the Sam Darnold excuses are over at this point because he finally has at least a decent offense to throw to and kind of play with. So I think that from a personal standpoint for Sam Darnold, I think this is a good move for him. And then also the Carolina Panthers, we should get into them too right now. This move is a little bit confusing, I would say. I think Sam Darnold, I guess they see something in him. They see that Sam Darnold could have a better future with the Carolina Panthers than he did with the New York Jets, obviously, because they gave up a little bit of their future for him. And he certainly could have the potential to do so, I think. Like I just said, they do have weapons on the offensive side of the ball that will help Sam. And maybe that's just the confidence boost he needs. Maybe he just needs a change of scenery to really boost his game. But for me, for the Carolina Panthers, I don't think Sam Darnold is your franchise quarterback at all. I don't think Sam Darnold's franchise quarterback anywhere, to be honest. So that's why this move, I guess, confuses me a little bit from Carolina's perspective, because they also have Teddy Bridgewater, and what are they going to do with those two guys? And then they also talk about they're not ruling out taking a quarterback in the draft. So they could also draft a quarterback. That leaves 3 quarterbacks, and then all of a sudden, I have no idea what's going on in Carolina.
Yeah, I don't understand the move really. I mean, obviously, they're looking for a quarterback and they're willing to give Sam Darnold a shot. Obviously upgrade lines if you're Sam Darnold. I don't think Carolina is a stunning offensive line. I think they're probably middle in the NFL if you had to rank offensive lines. I mean, you're going from the Jets, though, which might be the worst offensive line in the NFL. So obviously an upgrade for Sam Darnold, and he's struggled a lot with pass protection and having time to throw the ball. So I understand how this move might help Sam Darnold. I think he might be the next winner next to the Jets. If you had to say winners in this trade, it'd be Sam Darnold and the Jets. I don't see the Carolina as a winner here. I mean, obviously you pair Sam Darnold and McCaffrey, maybe something that can happen, but I was a fan of Teddy Bridgewater. I think he's a better guy for that role. And you talked about bridge quarterbacks. I think Teddy Bridgewater is one of those guys that's pretty good at it. He did that with the Saints before they got Drew Brees got back. I think he could do it with Carolina if they want to get a QB. if I'm the Panthers, I would have rather keep my picks and take a guy like Kyle Trask at their in the first round. But obviously, they went a different route, and I guess they see something in Sam Darnold that maybe me and you don't.
I guess so. I mean, this begs the question now here, in terms of the NFL draft, who the Jets will take. You know, obviously Zach Wilson, we talked about for BYU, seems to be the favorite, but that isn't set in stone. I would say it's never set in stone when it comes to the NFL draft. And like I mentioned too, there's a very strong potential of quarterbacks being taken 1, 2, 3. I mean, Trevor Lawrence is the only guarantee, obviously at number 1. And it seems like the Jets are going to take a quarterback in number 2 because of this move. It seems like that would make a lot of sense. And then the 49ers too, a lot of people think they're going to take a quarterback as well, just because of their trading to move up to that number 3 pick. So Mike, I want you to get your crystal ball out here, and I want you to tell me, what do you think the Jets are going to do here in the draft? Do you think Zach Wilson is their guy, or do you think they go in another direction?
I've been mixed. I've been back and forth with this. I really liked Fields. I think a lot of that was when they beat Clemson. He looked really good.
Mm-hmm.
But when I look at the tape and when I look at the stats, I mean, I really like Wilson here. I think he's a really good QB. I mean, he's got really good accuracy. I mean, he had 73% pass accuracy, and compared to Darnold, that's a big difference than when Darnold came out of college. So I think that's a really impressive, and he can run the ball. I mean, just like Fields, they both can run the ball, but he's a real dual threat. I mean, this is a guy who's going to be really mobile, and with that offensive line, that's a guy you're going to want. You don't want a guy like Sam Darnold who's going to sit in the pocket and throw it around. Mac Jones is a very similar situation. I think if you're the Jets, you want to get a guy like Zach Wilson. And I don't see another QB that maybe I would draft there. Fields potentially, but it's either of those guys, or I'm going to get an offensive lineman or one of the top wide receivers. I think that's the move the Jets go. I think obviously with the Sam Darnold move, it looks like they're going to go in the QB direction. And I think a lot of people think it's Zach Wilson now. I don't think this is a big discussion. It's just, do we think he's going to be good? Will he be the day week 1 starter? I think that's the bigger question now.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, for sure. And the only thing with Zach Wilson, I guess, I mean, the tools are all there, which I think makes lots of Jets fans and sports fans in general kind of just trust Wilson and trust the potential he could bring. And that's huge. I mean, just to have those tools there. I mean, his pro day, you could see everyone was very impressed with his arm strength and everything that went into that day.
It was a good throw.
But, oh, yeah, it was a tremendous throw. And I mean, that's got to be, if you're a Jets fan, you're excited seeing that, because it doesn't matter. The thing is I think people will make the argument that Zach Wilson comes from BYU. And like we talked about with Gonzaga in basketball, another team that doesn't really play too good of a conference schedule, doesn't really compete at a really high level, although they were a very good team this year. And that had a lot to do with Zach Wilson at the helm there. But I think when Zach Wilson brings these tools to the table, those kind of overcome any of those doubts. Because like you said, you mentioned Justin Fields. I was very high on Justin Fields too. And it was exactly because of that Clemson game. You know, seeing him play on national television in a big-time game, getting hit very hard. I don't know if you remember that big hit he took to the ribs. And was able to still play through that.
Yeah, and he came back for the Warriors.
Played unbelievably well. So that was, for me, that was like, wow, this guy is he's really good. Zach Wilson, people didn't watch BYU. People didn't really watch maybe that one game at the end of the year, but overall, people aren't really all eyes aren't on BYU throughout the regular season. So it's a little different. But I think when you look at pro day and when you look at things from more a stand back perspective as we're in the off season, you see Zach Wilson and his tools, and I think he could definitely help the Jets there. And I was negative on the Jets, obviously, as I just talked about in the Sam Darnold trade, but I do think that Zach Wilson can be that guy. He for sure can be that guy to build around and rebuild, and I hope for Jets fans he is. And one more thing here, I think the 49ers are in a really interesting spot, and it depends on what the Jets do. Because the 49ers, I assume, are interested in taking a quarterback as well, although they say they are, committed to Jimmy Garoppolo, but that doesn't seem likely here as they've traded up to that number 3 spot. So it looks like they're going to take a quarterback too. And for me, that's an interesting move because the Jets are most likely, as we mentioned, going to take Zach Wilson. But if they do or if they don't, I think it really changes what the 49ers do at that number 3 spot. If the Jets decide against taking Zach Wilson and maybe take Justin Fields instead? Do the 49ers have their hearts set on Justin Fields, and then now if he's gone, decide to take another position instead? For me, I guess maybe the 49ers are thinking whichever guy the Jets take, we'll take the other maybe. But I think it's just an interesting position because a lot of their pick and their decision making goes into what the Jets end up doing, which I guess isn't 100% certain at the quarterback position. So that just interests me, and I think that 1-2-3 lineup of quarterbacks as well in the draft interests me also.
Yeah, I think 2 and 3 is going to be the most interesting thing in the draft. I think we see Wilson go to the Jets, but the third pick I think is up in the air. I think Mac Jones could go there. There's been a lot of talk that it could be reaching for a guy like that, but if you think he's your quarterback, then you're going to pick him there. I think Trey Lance is in there too, potentially in that first round. There's a lot of guys to pick from. I still think it's going to go Trevor Lawrence, Zach Wilson, and probably Justin Fields, but I think Mac Jones is on the cusp there. But I think we're going to know more as we get closer, so it's going to be interesting to see as rumors start to come out where these QBs are going to fall in that first round.
Yeah, that's the thing with NFL draft talk. Like you just said, we're going to wait and see because no matter how much we know, you don't know everything, and things always seem to go in a slightly different way than you anticipated. Sometimes a majorly different way than anticipated. That's why NFL draft talk is so fun, but also you take it with a grain of salt because we just have to wait and see until draft day. So that's going to do it for the NFL talk and the Sam Darnold talk. We're going to take a short break. On the other side, we will discuss the injury concerns here with Brooklyn Nets as James Harden is now out of the lineup as soon as KD is back in it. So stay tuned with us. We'll be back on One-on-One Nightly. Welcome back to One-on-One Nightly. We are taking you up until 11 p.m. tonight on YouTube and Twitter. Sam Davis with Mike Calamari, Alex Wolves behind the scenes doing the production. James Harden will be out for at least the next 10 days for the Brooklyn Nets with a hamstring strain. Ironically, the exact same injury Kevin Durant suffered from keeping him out the last 23 games. For him, he's He didn't start tonight, but actually has gotten some minutes in tonight's game going on right now. The Nets' big three has been basically hypothetical this season. They've only played 7 games together since James Harden came over from Houston in January 14th. And I'm reading that, and that sounds like a tremendous season a long time ago. It felt like it happened yesterday. Anyways, Mike, do the Nets need all three, KD, Kyrie, and Harden, of course, to win an NBA championship? Or can they find a way to do it without either one or two of them even?
I think 2 might be tough if 2 guys are down, but what I've noticed with the super teams is as you add more players, you become normalized to the amount of stars they have in the team. I mean, before the Nets were the favorites in the East with KD and Kyrie, and now when Harden's added to there, they're the favorites to win the championships, obviously. But just because one guy isn't there, you still got 2 All-Stars. I don't think you get worried. I think that even with Harden out and maybe one of like the preliminary All-Stars like Aldridge and Blake Griffin, if those guys are out too, because they're older and they might have health risks come postseason time, I still don't think you're worried. I mean, even if you have KD, Kyrie, or any combination of the 3 guys there, I don't think it's a worry at all. I mean, I don't see a team on the East that can challenge them. I mean, looking at the standings, they're second in the East, 35-16. They're really tied with Philadelphia. Philadelphia's in first, but tiebreaker puts Philly ahead of them. I just don't see, even with 2 of those stars, a team in the East that can beat them. And you mentioned all the injuries and how a few times they played all together, and they're still that high of a record. I mean, it's impressive to me, and I think they're going to walk through this East.
I'm going to disagree with you. I don't disagree with you that they're going to win the East, and I think the regular season doesn't worry me very much, if at all, because they've played this whole time, like I mentioned, without all 3 of them. And they've obviously done very well, sitting atop the East, or at least tied for it right now. And that's not really a worry. It would be nice to get that number 1 spot for home court advantage throughout the Eastern Conference playoffs. I think that's important. But even that, I think they can find a way to get that pretty easily with 2 out of the 3, whoever that may be. For the Nets there, I think it's a slightly weak Eastern Conference, and they can certainly work their way through it. They're the most talented team in the conference, and they're probably the best team in the conference, even just 2 of them out of the big 3 there. So I don't worry about that, but I do worry about playoff time. If I'm going to be totally honest, I worry about especially hamstrings. I feel like hamstring injuries are one of those injuries that are reoccurring. If you talk to athletes, I feel like hamstrings tend to happen over and over and over again, unfortunately. And that's something that's definitely worrisome for both Harden and KD coming back from that same injury. Come playoff time, I think all 3 of these guys need to be healthy in order to assure that, okay, I'm not worried as a Nets fan, or I'm not worried that this team is going to make a run here and end with a championship. But for me, I think there's always, whenever there's injury involved, I guess for me, maybe it's just me, but I'm a little pessimistic just because of the potential of, let's say Harden or a KD goes down in the playoffs, God forbid, but it puts the Nets in a really difficult situation, I'd say. I think the Eastern Conference is within due, and it's certainly possible to work your way through that conference. But, come championship time and you got to play a Lakers team, well, hopefully a Lakers team, if they're healthy. Obviously, LeBron and AD, that's another question mark there. And now that I bring that up, that's a reason why I'm a little bit, I guess, more optimistic with the Nets than I would normally be, just because LeBron and AD, I don't think they even have a timetable yet to return either of them. So that's a worrisome thing for the Lakers. The Lakers, if I'm a Lakers fan, I'm seriously worried about that for sure. But that, I guess you could say, helps the Nets a little bit. I hate to say that with an injury, but it does, because that Lakers team seems to be the biggest challenge for them, come NBA Finals time, or even come playoff time in general. So, but my point is, I guess, is that come playoff time, these guys have to be fully healthy and have to be at least a week or 2 under their belt playing together, which I assume they will have that amount of time. But to me, it's about staying healthy throughout the playoffs for this next team to really thrive and I'd say reach the NBA Finals, which I think is just about the goal of this season. at least reach the NBA Finals, if not more, depending obviously on the Western Conference, depending on the Lakers and their health, depending on the Jazz and some other teams out there as well.
Yeah, I agree with a lot of those points. I mean, you definitely feel like this is a season you got to capitalize on. For that reason, you're a little worried. But I mean, I'm looking at these other teams and the Lakers, like you said, there's a lot of up in the air. I mean, they're hoping Anthony Davis comes back to face the Celtics April 15th. They were talking he might return when they after the road trip. That's a possibility. There's obviously no rush to bring him back. You don't want to bring him back and then risk another injury. But LeBron, there's been no timetable, so you're worried about that if you're a Laker fan. So for those reasons, the Nets probably a little more relaxed. And out of the East, I don't see any real threats. I mean, Philadelphia kind of scares me because Embiid's having such a great season. I think Ben Simmons has improved. He might be the best defender in the league. I mean, he's not going to win Defensive Player of the Year, but if you talk about a backcourt defender, there's not many better than him. And I think that the Bucks are good with Giannis, but they've yet to prove anything to me in the playoffs that would matter. I would still take KD, Harden, and Kyrie over them. And I think outside of those two teams, there aren't really any threats to me in the East. And then if you go over to the West, I think a lot is to be determined there. And whoever the Nets happen to face in the championship, that's already, I think, a success of a season if you made it that far. So in looking at it that way, I'm not worried about the Nets. Even if Harden's down, I think even if Kyrie's down, I think KD's good enough to maybe bring these teams to the Eastern Conference Finals.
I think it's funny because if you looked at it when this trade initially occurred, at least for me, for James Harden in the beginning of January, the middle of January, I would have, if I had heard, oh, they only played 7 games together, the big three, I would definitely think the Nets would be in a lot worse position than they would be in right now, because I felt like they were a very good team beforehand. But when they got this big three together, I still had some doubts just because I guess, defensively, they aren't a very good defensive team, and come playoff time that could present some issues. But if you told me that they would only play 7 games together now and they're sitting atop the Eastern Conference, I don't know if I would 100% believe you, but I just find that pretty impressive with how good this Nets team really is. The fact that they've done it for the most part with 1 or 2 guys. Harden has stepped up huge. You got to give him a ton of credit for what he's done in Brooklyn. And Kyrie coming back has helped a lot too. And now with Kevin Durant back, one of the best players on the planet right now, that is awesome. That is a huge thing, a huge piece to have back for this Nets team as they move forward into the playoffs. I want to stay with New York basketball here to talk about the Knicks as well in relation to the Nets here. So the Knicks have, just about surprised everyone in the basketball world. I think it's safe to say with how they've played this season. They also, I would say, have surprised basketball with how they played the Nets. They've played the Nets. I mean, they have lost to them 3 times, but they played them very close all 3 times. Some really great matchups. Most recently, they lost 114, 112 on Monday night. A very good effort, very close game, back and forth at the end. You obviously have the Julius Randle travel call that created a lot of kind of controversy, and certainly, I think, stirred up words or thoughts of rivalry a little bit here between these two teams. Obviously, in much different situations. You have the Nets looking to win a championship. It's just about championship or bust. And the Knicks are rebuilding, although they're doing it at a very accelerated rate. They are still rebuilding. So 2 franchises kind of in very different directions, but 3 evenly played games throughout the season. And for me, this seems to be a New York rivalry that we're going to be able to look forward to years to come down the road.
Yeah, I definitely think there's something there. I mean, when you get a team that's that stacked in Brooklyn, I think the entire Knicks fan base wants to beat them. So anytime they're in the Garden or the Knicks are out in Brooklyn, there's a lot of fire in that team to go out and beat the Nets, especially when 2 of those stars passed up on coming to the Garden to go to the Nets. So I think that definitely adds to the rivalry. My question would just be, will the Knicks ever be on the Nets level basketball-wise? Will they be able to build a team that can ever compete with them seriously? That is the only thing holding back this rivalry, in my opinion. I mean, when they play, yeah, it's exciting, but everyone knows that there's the Nets and then there's the Knicks, at least right now. So that's the biggest thing to me. Listen, I think this is a really good young Knicks team, And you got to hope that one of the young guys, either RJ, quickly really develops into that star, you can say, or leader of that team. I think that would be a great thing for the Knicks to have. But it's yet to be seen. And I still think they need to do work in the draft before they get to the Nets level and really make it a rivalry.
I mean, certainly the Knicks aren't at the Nets level. I think that's a very obvious statement. But my thought process is that this, first of all, could be a first round playoff matchup potentially, which I think would be really interesting and certainly exciting for the city of New York. I think that would be funny too, because I feel like the majority of New Yorkers would be rooting for the Knicks, despite the fact that the Nets are, arguably making a finals run. They are making a finals run. And the Knicks just making the playoffs is great for them, as you mentioned. So I think that would be interesting. But even outside of that, the Nets window is pretty short. Since this Harden trade, they have given away lots of their future. They have the big three under their control for 3 years. So that's a pretty short window of the years that the Nets are going to be really good or this good. So for that window, yes, I think the Knicks will still be rebuilding. They're certainly not going to get to the level of the Nets, I don't think, at least over the next couple of years. However, down the road, I could see 4 or 5 years down the road. I know it's a long way, but I could totally see this Knicks team. Like you said, if RJ Barrett maybe turns into that star or Quick turns into that star for this team, becoming the team of New York, and all of a sudden the Nets kind of trade places with them almost. And maybe this is kind of a fantasy, or maybe this is not necessarily something that'll happen, but I think the Nets window to win a championship and the Nets window of having this big three is a couple years. But outside of that, I think what started as kind of a budding rivalry right now could be a full-blown rivalry in a couple of years when this Knicks team is a lot better, fully rebuilt, and the Nets team might be coming off a championship or coming off having this big three together. That's what I'm thinking of. Maybe could be some sort of rivalry for them down the road. Certainly exciting time for New York basketball. Before we wrap up here, our NBA talk, I want to look at the ESPN list of NBA's top 25 players under the age of 25. And this generated a ton of criticism. Most notably, LaMelo Ball was placed over Donovan Mitchell and Jason Tatum, as well as Devin Booker, as well as many others. Yeah, you heard that right. That was the decision by ESPN. So, Mike, I want to get your opinion on this. Is this list really as bad as people are claiming it is?
Yeah, we were talking about this earlier. When we first started talking about it, I was blown away when I saw LaMelo Ball that high. But it's a projection list. They're looking down into the NBA by 5-10 years, really. Still, I don't see how you're going to put established guys behind LaMelo Ball and Zion Williamson. I think that still is a little absurd, but there's a couple guys that I felt like were missing on this list. First, the guy I thought was most left off, that snubbed, you can say, was, Tyler Hero definitely should have been on this list. I don't see how guys like Mikal Bridges and Jared Allen should be on this list ahead of Tyler Hero. Those are two good basketball players, but I think I talk about talents and guys who could potentially be a 1 or 2 on a team. I think Hero is one of those guys, and we saw it in the bubble. And we haven't seen Tyler Hero bubble really this season. The Heat have not been as good. They're climbing their way through the East right now, but they started off slow. But I still see a lot of potential in Hero, and I don't know how he doesn't make that list. The other thing I thought was interesting that I'm happy ESPN did is Colin Sexton made the list. I think he's a great basketball player. He's 25th on that list. He's having a good season, and he's one of the most underrated basketball players in the NBA right now. So I definitely appreciate that he actually got finally some love by ESPN. I don't know how Jared Allen, another Cavalier, is ahead of him on the list. It's obviously Colin Sexton as the young guy, but I don't think a lot of people are thinking about Colin Sexton. So start watching him. I think that was a good move by ESPN to put him on this list.
So not all bad, I guess, for this ESPN list. Certainly faced a lot of criticism, but it is important to note it is based on potential, which I don't like doing that in general, because how do you judge someone? You can judge someone's potential, but you don't know. You can't see into the future. And
they should have did it right now, like top 25, under 25 right now.
Exactly. And that's, I think, the way a lot of people read into this rankings. And for that reason, I get the outrage. And I still, to be honest, get the outrage about Donovan Mitchell below LaMelo Ball and below Zion Williamson. I don't get that just because he is the leading scorer on the best team in the NBA record-wise in the Utah Jazz. To me, that seems like almost a no-brainer to put him pretty high on that list, certainly above those two young guys. But that's going to end our NBA talk. Lots of exciting stuff as we approach the final month and a half or so of the NBA season. Great stuff, Mike. We're going to take a break. We'll be back to talk Major League Baseball as the season is underway. Yankees and Mets when we come back. This is One on One Nightly. Welcome back to One on One Nightly. I'm Sam Davis with Mike Calamari, Alex Wolves doing the production. We are live on YouTube and Twitter, taking you up until 11 p.m. on this fine Wednesday evening here. Thank you for being with us. Checking in on the Yankees here. We're going to get into some baseball. Yes, Mets and Yankees talk. Orioles up 4-3 as we head to the bottom of the 11th here. A nail biter here as the Yankees look to sweep the Orioles over at the stadium. Mike, as we know, baseball is back, and I don't know about you, I am really excited about it. Something just about full season, April opening day, fans in the stands, it just feels like some sort of normalcy, which I think I'm very excited for, and I'm sure you are too. We have two exciting teams here in New York, as I mentioned. You got the Yankees, but we're going to start with the Mets here. So the Mets obviously started their season late due to COVID-19 issues with the Washington Nationals, and they sit 1-2 after losing their first series of the year against the Phillies. To me, Mike, this team is very exciting. You got Francisco Lindor signing. You have DeGrom, who's always very fun to watch. But this bullpen just seems to be the Mets' problem every single year, doesn't it, Mike?
Yeah, I mean, I think, I mean, you go back to all the nosebleed shows we did over the winter, all the podcasts we had. A lot of people were in on this Mets team, and for a lot of those shows, was like, let's get the reins and let's hold back because they're still the Mets. And I think the bullpen has shown that. DeGrom was great. Stroman was great, but you got to go 2-0 in those games, and especially when the DeGrom one. When he brings it all the way to the eighth, you got to win that game. So if I'm a Met fan, that's got to be killing me that it's another year and it's the same story with the bullpen. I mean, Trevor May struggled, and that's a guy that you're expecting to bolster that bullpen. So it's interesting and how this team's going to play out, but I'm hopeful for the Mets team. I'm hoping they can make a run at the wild card at the very East. I don't think they're going to win the division. It's early and they lost the opening series, so they're still a little behind the other teams, but I'm not sold on them yet. I got to see the bullpen. The starting pitching is there and the bats are looking better, but the bullpen's got to come together.
Yeah, I totally agree. It begins and ends with the bullpen, but I'm a little more optimistic on the Mets than you are. To be honest, Mike, I think it's certainly the weakest part of this team for sure. I would say that there's no doubt in that. But you got to remember Seth Lugo. He's hurt right now. Obviously, a little concerned whether he'll be 100% when he's back. But he is a huge piece of their bullpen. Probably the best arm out there in that bullpen.
Mm-hmm.
So that's a huge piece missing for them. It's early. He'll be back with plenty of time here in the regular season for them. And I hope he's back in 100% because this Mets bullpen certainly needs it. But also Trevor May, you mentioned him. I mean, he did get off to a very tough start with his Mets career, but he was very good with the Twins in the past, and that's the guy that the Mets decided to put their faith in and bring into this bullpen. And I think it's too early for us to be down on Trevor May. It's way too early. I think this guy could turn into something really big for the Mets. Between him and Lugo, I think those two guys can really lock down that bullpen and be solid pieces that you could actually depend on, which is the big issue, I think, with this bullpen right now is you feel like there's no one out there that the Mets can depend on. Rojas, the manager, doesn't really have anybody to turn to where he could be confident in, okay, this guy is going to get me out of this jam, or this guy is going to take the ball after DeGrom goes 8 innings strong. That's really not there right now. I think Lugo could be that guy. May, maybe, but probably not, but at least could be a compliment to Lugo in that bullpen because let's face it, there are some big question marks. I mean, you got Jerry Familia, you got Edwin Diaz, Dylan Betances. Those are some certainly big question marks in that bullpen for the Mets that could be good, but obviously, as we've seen in the past, has just not been very good. And it's certainly another year, but the same thing here in terms of the Mets worrying about the bullpen. But I'm still optimistic just because of how good this team is outside of it, basically. I mean, this lineup is very fun to watch. It's a very good lineup. The pitching staff, the starting rotation, I think when they get Syndergaard and Carrasco back, is a really solid rotation, a very good rotation between those two, Stroman and DeGrom. That's a really good lineup there. Come playoff time in, let's say, a 5-game series, in a divisional series or a 7-game series as well, that rotation is scary. I think if you're facing the Mets in a divisional series, if it comes down to that. I think the bullpen makes it tough for me to believe this Mets team can win the division. And I think there was already skepticism around that in general. But I think certainly a wild card is definitely within grasp. And come wild card game, as we mentioned, you're going to look at DeGrom, and that's going to be really tough to face in a 1-game wild card. That's something that whoever faces them seems like it might be the Padres. That could be a potential matchup, a great matchup. That's very tough. It's just about whether this bullpen can kind of carry those last couple innings and kind of get the Mets over the hump here to get a wild card and maybe move themselves into making a playoff run.
Yeah, I agree. I mean, take everything when I say it's only been 3 games. It's really early. So there's a lot of time to change. I mean, when Nationals won the World Series, they were well under 500 at the 30-game mark. So there's still a lot of time for this Mets team to discover who they are and learn about the bullpen and who's the guy and who's not. So I think that they could be at the top of the division at the end of the year. I just don't think they're going to best the Braves, and I think the Nationals are going to be in there again. So I think that makes it tough. I do think the Mets need to figure out a way to close out these games. I think it's tough when you're looking for a new era as a Steve Cohen and a Met fan, and then you watch DeGrom take it to the eighth and you lose. I mean, every Met fan's seen that way too many times. So I feel like that was tough, but I think there's a lot of season left for the Mets. Obviously, we're just started. So it's going to be exciting what happens. And you can also talk about the Lindor deal that just went happen. They extend him. So he's a Met for a while. So it's going to be fun to see him in the Met uniform and in Queens long term.
Yeah, I mean, he's a stud. He's a hell of a player, and that's exactly what that money means. It shows how important of a player he is. And I think outside of how well he plays on the field, we've seen Cohen and Rojas just talk about how good he is in the clubhouse for this team. You know, he's really buying in to what the Mets are offering, and he's really helping a ton of guys just by his attitude, simply just like putting a smile on his face and going to work every single day. There's something to be said about that. And for me, if I'm a Mets fan, I love building a franchise around a guy like Francisco Lindor that every day is going to give it his all, really put a smile on his face. And also, yeah, he's probably going to hit 30 homers and maybe even hit 300. So certainly a lot of good things for the Mets in terms of their lineup, in terms of their starting rotation once they get those guys back. And then the bullpen is always the question mark. We'll see what they do. Maybe they look to make a move at the trade deadline. I know that's far away, but that could be something to maybe add in the bullpen. A lot of contending teams do that, which the Mets hope they are at that point in the year. So the Mets, as I mentioned, a lot to go right with the bullpen. I think for the Yankees, the same thing was thought about with the starting rotation. A lot seemed to have to go right to them. And so far, things are going right. I mean, we've seen Kluber, we've seen Tyone tonight. Pitched decent, pitched pretty well, pitched not too bad. The bats have come alive, have found it over the last few games. And Mike, I know you got the Yankees hat. You're supporting the team tonight. What do you have to say about your team here after the first 6 games of the season?
Yeah, I think the Yanks I think they're in a good spot right now. It's nice to see Cole get out there, and he's Garrett Cole again, and he's going out there and he's giving you scoreless 1-2 run ball games when he pitches. I liked what I saw from Kluber. I think that he's going to be good for the team. You had him on a short leash in this first game, but that's understandable. I hope the Yanks are going to let him loose for 6 or 7 inning starts. That would be something that would be big and a relief for the bullpen. I think the thing that's really different about this Yankees is that the bats seem a little more silent or slow than they have been in years past. Usually it's the other way around, and we have like big time 7-8 ball games where there's a lot of runs and a lot of home runs. But this year there's not been that. It's been pitching duels for the Yankees for the most part, especially tonight. And I think that it's going to be really important to see how this team comes together, and specifically the outfield. Is Clint Frazier going to be a legit left fielder for the Yankees? I'm a believer. Not everyone is. How do Hicks and Gardner, what happens with them? Who ends up playing in center mostly? So I think that's the biggest question for the Yankees right now. It's not the pitching. I think that's going to work itself out for the first time in a while for the Yankees. But how is the outfield going to work, and what's the best combination there? It's probably my biggest question from here on out.
I'm surprised that you said that the pitching is going to work itself out, or maybe that you're so optimistic about the pitching.
I don't know. I just saw the Italian pitch tonight. He pitched well. Cole last night, I was watching the game. He pitched really well. Kluber looked good. When you got 3 guys that look good like that, and then Severino might come back post All-Star break, I think 4 guys is good enough to get you through the regular season.
Yeah, I mean, that's the thing for me, is that's how I think about it, because I've been very critical of the Yankees in terms of starting the rotation, because that's where I see the biggest weakness on this team. I think the bats will find itself, I seem to believe. As you said, they've done it in years past as well, and it's basically the same lineup out there. I mean, Garrett Cole's going to be Garrett Cole, and that's a whole nother discussion. He's an unbelievable pitcher, and he's obviously going to be the ace of this rotation. But outside of that, for me, Kluber and Montgomery are 2 big ones that have impressed me early on. I think Kluber had a nice start, first good start. I think his first start in years, which is very good for him to kind of get his feet under himself. Didn't pitch too long, but did what he had to do. And I'd say relatively impressed in his first start. And Montgomery was very good as well. He pitched on Monday night against the O's. He pitched very well, and Tyone has done a pretty good job tonight in game 3 of the series. So for me, those guys are very much key after Garrett Cole, because for me, between Kluber, between Tyone, and between Severino, who you mentioned, who should come back at the second half, right around the All-Star break. For me, two of those three guys I think need to be good and need to stay healthy and need to hit for this Yankees team, because from there you have Garrett Cole, one of those, two of those three, like I mentioned. Let's say it's Kluber and Severino, and then you have Montgomery as your number four. And I'd say that's a pretty good rotation come playoff. I don't really worry about this Yankees team in the American League. I don't really worry about this team winning the division, to be honest. I mean, the Blue Jays have looked pretty good, but their rotation still is just not quite there. The lineup's awesome. The lineup's really fun to watch, but the rotation just isn't quite there for them. So I don't see them seriously contending for the division, at least. Certainly a wild card, but not the division. I think this division is the Yankees to lose for sure. But come playoff time, I think you need a really good rotation. You need two of those three guys, like I mentioned, to hit. Have a really solid group of four in that rotation that's healthy. And then you need the lineup to stay healthy, which is another big thing too. I mean, Gary Sanchez playing well, that's a huge benefit. That's a huge positive sign for Yankee fans. Judge and Stanton hitting home runs, getting kind of their legs underneath them as well is a big sign. To me, the bullpen has looked pretty good as well. Michael King looked very good. Loaizaga looked pretty good as well in the times he's came into the game. So that's important too. Kind of the long bullpen for them will certainly play a role. And Britton's not even back yet. So once he's back, that'll add another dimension out there. So for me, it starts and ends with the starting pitchers, to be honest. But, I guess when it comes to the Yankees, like I kind of mentioned with the Mets, there's a lot to be optimistic about for sure. Like I mentioned, that offense is going to continue to produce. That's a huge part of this. That rotation, if they can stay healthy for the most part, they'll be in really good shape, I could say, for the future and setting up a deep playoff run for the Yankees.
Yeah, I definitely see both teams having great potential, Mets and Yankees. I just think what worries me a little with the Yankees is that we struggle at times with timely hits, and I think that's the biggest thing the Yankees can work to improve. I mean, last night, early in the first inning, bases loaded, and you get 3 strikeouts at the end of the inning. So it's things like that have killed them and gotten them losses early in the year. Only 6 games, so there's a lot of improvement for the Yanks, but I still think that's one way you can focus is getting guys in the lineup. They're going to get hits at the right time. The pitching's always been a concern with the Yankees, and I think every time you're talking about the Yankees, it's always been the pitching. And the front office knows it. I think the whole team knows that the pitching is somewhere they can get better at, both starting and relieving. But when the bats aren't coming alive and that's your identity, that's when you worry. So that's what I would say is the biggest worry for the Yankees right now. When you lose your identity, then it's going to be tough for you moving forward. So I think they got to find that and get back on track. I mean, this is a team that's top 2 in home runs almost every year. I mean, them and the Twins have gone back and forth for the past 2 years. So I think that it's important for the Yankees to get back on that pedestal. And then the starting pitching, like every year, is just going to have to find a way to grind it out, because your identity is a home run hitting team that's going to knock in guys when they get on base. And I think that needs to continue for them to be a serious contender this year.
Yeah, before we end our baseball talk here, I know me and Mike love talking baseball. The 7 extra inning games so far in the 2021 MLB season. And we all know, we've all seen it, the infamous extra innings rule with a runner on second base starting in the 10th inning. Mike, I can just tell by the look on your face you don't like this rule, but I want to hear your opinion on it here. What do you think about the rule? And tell me what you think about starting with a runner on second base in the 10th inning.
Yeah, I hate it. I think it's stupid. You're trying to speed up a game that's not timed. I mean, it's not timed for a reason. The game's not supposed to be determined by a clock. So why you're rushing to the finish line is my biggest thing with the rule. And I just don't understand. You put the pitcher at a disadvantage immediately. And I just think that there's everything about the rule. It's hard to get into one thing, but I feel like when you grind out getting guys on base and you bunt people over, that's what the game is meant to be in extra innings. I mean, it's electric when the leadoff guy gets the base hit and starts the rally. It's not the same when the guy leading off gets a base hit to score the winning run. I feel like that's anticlimactic, and it takes away from what the game was built on, honestly, that you score runs by getting guys on base, not by having one there already. So I think it goes against the game. I'm not a fan, but there's a lot of ways baseball's trending right now that I don't agree with. So at a certain point, you just got to enjoy the game and accept it.
Yeah, I mean, I will say this. I'm going to slightly push back on you. I think it's exciting. I think it's exciting because for me, I love baseball, and I want to get that out of the way. I love baseball. I have my whole life. This is my favorite sport to watch. But come extra innings, let's say it's a weeknight, and I've got to get to bed. Maybe I have a test the next day or something. Normally, I'd turn it off, but in this scenario, when I know something exciting is going to happen very quickly, come the 10th inning, come the top or the bottom, I stick around. I stay tuned and watch the end of that game. And I think this isn't about gaining extra viewers because I don't think you really are in this scenario. It's more, I guess, about keeping viewers is their kind of MLB's kind of initiative or goal. But I don't agree with how MLB has really implemented this decision because they aren't really making a lot of moves outside of it to speed up the game. There are certainly other rules that they've tossed around or considered doing to really speed this game up. And if that's their goal, then do it, So make the rules so that you have to put 1 foot in the batter's box or really enforce the time between innings or limit mound visits. Do what you have to do around this rule as well if you really want to shorten the game, if that's your goal. If your goal is to bring new fans in, well, that's also something that can be done through shortening the game. So for me, I don't like the implementation of this rule by MLB because you either are going to leave baseball the way it is or make these changes to generate new fans. Because I want to see baseball. I want to see baseball get more new fans. I want to see an excitement surrounding the game come out of opening day, which this year has been very exciting. I'll give it that. But like fans, especially new fans, younger fans are excited about the NBA or the NFL. I want to see that more for baseball. I want to see more new fans. But at the same time, I'm fine with leaving baseball the way it is. Don't kind of do the in-between. Go all the way one way or all the way the other way. That's what I think. I do like this move. I think it's exciting. But the reason I don't like it is because of the implementation. If it was done with a bunch of other kind of initiatives to speed up baseball, I think I'd like it a lot more. So that's kind of my opinion on it, I guess.
To go off that, I mean, before we cut to break really quick, I think the biggest thing is for baseball to learn right now is don't try to get new fans and then lose your fans in the process. I think that's the biggest thing. I mean, it would be a stupid move to try to go out and get these new young fans that frankly aren't going to be attracted to the game with no clock to begin with. So I think that you have to know who you are and just be happy with the fan base you have. I think hockey did that for a while, and I think baseball shouldn't want to be like hockey, which is very much a non-existent sport in a lot of fans' eyes and sports people eyes, but they have one of the biggest fan base ever. I mean, hockey fans are diehard hockey fans, and I think baseball can be like that. But if you start monkeying with the game and it's not even familiar to the game you had before, like the rule they tested in the minors, where a drop pitch on any pitch can be stolen first. It was like if the catcher boots the ground, a dirt ball, you can steal first. Things like that to try to make the game more exciting, I think, are just stupid ways to get new fans. And I think you got to just keep the fans you have right now.
Yeah, I mean, the thing is, between me and Mike, we might have our disagreements on the rule in particular, but we both have our hearts in the right place. We both love baseball and want to see it do what's best for the sport, for sure. So we're going to be back here to wrap up the show with a tradition unlike any other, as they call it. In the Masters. On the other side, Mike and I will preview the event, which starts tomorrow. You're watching One on One Nightly. Stick around. We'll be back. Welcome back to One on One Nightly. I'm Sam Davis with Mike Calamari. Alex Wolves is our producer. We are taking you to the top of the hour here on Twitter and YouTube. Thank you for listening and watching wherever you are. The Masters is back, and this time it's going to be in the month of April, and it is very good to have it back, a real sign of spring, I think. Dustin Johnson won the tournament last year in November. Obviously, due to COVID, it was shifted from April, while Tiger Woods won it the last time it was in April in 2019. Mike, let's start with you here. I want to get a sleeper pick, maybe someone that you think will surprise or maybe even have the chance to win their first green jacket this Sunday.
Yeah, really excited for the Masters. If I had to pick a sleeper, I like Victor Hovland. I don't think he's really a sleeper. I think a lot of golf guys have their eyes on him, but there might be a lot of people watching that really don't know golf a lot. They know the top guys, but not someone like Hovland. I mean, he's been really good the past couple of tournaments. I mean, if you go back to the Workday tournament, he was on track to be in the top of the leaderboard after day 2, but he had a quad bogey on the last hole of the day that costed him 4 strokes. So there's things like that have been tough for him, like where he's doing really good and then he has setbacks. So if he's on the top of his game, I think he could be top 10, top 5 in the leaderboards, potentially in the running to win it. I mean, saying that, you can say that with anybody. If Morikawa is on the top of his game, he's going to be in the top 10 of the leaderboards. If Justin Thomas is, he's probably going to be top 5. So it's really on whoever's on. I'll just pick Hovland to be one of the sleeper guys who's on.
Yeah, I'm going to go with you too. I'm taking a sleeper pick that's not really truly a sleeper, but mine is Lee Westwood. And Lee actually finished second or tied for second 2 times at the Masters in his career. He's coming off 2 second-place finishes this year. He's got the Players and the Arnold Palmer Invitational second place, so at both of those. So he hasn't really gotten over the hump, and like I said, it's not really a true sleeper. He's obviously had pretty high finishes, but I think he's a good kind of pick, maybe a sleeper to win it, or maybe a sleeper to certainly make another run. His odds are set at 30-1. I was looking at the odds today. 11 golfers are ahead of him, so like I said, not really a sleeper, but certainly a guy that I could see cracking the top 5 with a good performance this weekend, maybe even getting over that hump and getting his first green jacket. Another sleeper a little bit further down is Louis Oosthuizen. I've always liked him. His odds are 66-1, so kind of a long shot, but Louis made the cut 7 out of 8 times in Augusta, 7 out of 8 years. He's very consistent. He finished second in 2012, so that was a long time ago. He hasn't done any better since in Augusta, but for me, Louis very consistent. He's going to make the cut, and his odds are very low in this tournament. I could certainly see him making a run. He was third at Winged Foot in the U.S. Open in 2020, so I think Oosthuizen is in good shape to kind of make a little bit of a run here towards maybe his first green jacket as well. So before picking a winner, I want you to just give me a couple favorites you might think you have heading into Sunday, whether that be you think are going to win, or maybe even you think are maybe a touch overrated, or think, I don't know, maybe these favorites won't work out come Sunday and come Masters weekend.
Yeah, a couple favorites. I think Spieth is a big-time favorite heading into this. I mean, you just win the Valero, and you shot 18 under, 2 strokes ahead of the next best guy. When Spieth's putting's on, I think he's a top 5 golfer in the world. I mean, for a while when Spieth was killing it in 2014, 2015, he was the best putter in the world. And the question about his game was the irons and off the tee. And I think now Spieth has gotten so much better there. I mean, when he was in the Arnold Palmer Invitational and at the Players, he was driving the ball really good, and he was really good off the fairway. It's just his putting wasn't like it was in the past. And you saw that his putting was back last weekend. So I think if he continued that this weekend, he's going to have a very good chance. I think if I had to give another favorite, I'm going Dustin Johnson. It's hard not to pick him. Shot 20 under par back in November, 5 strokes ahead of the lead. I don't think 20 under par is going to be the winner this time. It's definitely a different season. The greens were much softer in November. It was easier to get them near the pin. This time, I think the score is going to be much lower. I could see a score under 10, maybe 11, 12 under par at the most. So it's going to be a different tournament, but it's hard not to pick a guy who tore through the course only 3 or 4 months ago. So I would say those two guys are probably my favorites. You can definitely name guys like Bryson. When he's driving the ball and hitting fairways, it's tough to beat him. There's concerns about the chipping, but he's a top 5 putter in the world right now. And you got like guys like Justin Thomas. I mean, you saw him at the Players Championship, wasn't even in the final pairing, and he just really went berserk in the final round. And he had birdie after birdie and clawed his way back to the top. So I think those 4 guys, mainly Spieth and Dustin Johnson for me, but those other 2 guys as well, those are guys you watch out for and easily favorites.
Yeah, I'm glad that you brought up Dustin Johnson, because I saw a ridiculous stat on DJ. He's beaten or tied 96% of golfers he's faced at the Masters in the last 5 years. So unbelievable amount of dominance in the last 5 years. He's lost to 18 out of 447 golfers in the Masters in 5 years. So sure, he shot 20 under in November, like you mentioned, but that wasn't just due to the course. That's due a lot to DJ and everything he's done over the last 5 years to prove himself as a very good golfer, an elite golfer, and an elite golfer in Augusta, which is not easy to do at all. Obviously, a very difficult course. That's something you can't say favorite in terms of Augusta and the Masters and not mention Dustin Johnson. Jordan Spieth brought up too. I want to talk about him because I think there's a touch of recency bias about him. I want to say in terms of Spieth, just because he did just win last week in Texas. And don't get me wrong, he's a great player, but I just think a lot has to go right for him to have another really good weekend, just because he has been very inconsistent, like you said. He's been driving it, striking it well, but second, third shots, short game, and then even his putting too, certainly hasn't been the best at times. He was 48th at the Players, 46th at the Masters in November. So 2 kind of rough finishes in it, and then you compare that with winning last week in Texas. So Spieth could very well go out and tear up this course and have an unbelievable tournament and win. I could totally see that happening. He definitely has the potential, but for me, I'm a little bit more cautious just because of his inconsistency and, like you said, not only in his finishes but also his game, I guess you could say. And one more guy I want to bring up, you kind of mentioned, is Bryson DeChambeau, who certainly is a favorite. He's had just an incredible season. Won at Winged Foot in the U.S. Open, 3rd at the Players, 1st at Arnold Palmer. But you compare that again to 34th at the Masters in November, 29th at the Masters in 2019. That is a little bit concerning for a favorite. I think his game has changed a lot recently. He's had a really good year, and he seems to be finding everything, because for him, it's another guy, kind of like Spieth. His driving and his long game will always be there, but it's going to come down to whether he can chip and whether he can putt, especially chipping. His short game is a huge part of this for DeChambeau. If he can do that well, I could say he can beat anyone, to be honest. But it's going to come down to that. And for me, he did that at Winged Foot. He could very well do that in Augusta, but I'm a little shaky. Another guy that I would say is a favorite, but I don't know if I can place my total trust in him to go out and win this tournament. So speaking of winning the tournament, I want to get your pick, Mike. Who do you think is going to win this year's Masters, take home the green jacket?
I'd love to be bold and give a pick that if someone won, it would be impressive that I picked it. But if I really had to say who I would think win, it's hard not to pick Dustin Johnson. Shooting 20 at a par, I don't care when it is, even if it's in November, is impressive. Oh, yeah. And I think he's the best golfer in the world, so I'm going to pick the best golfer in the world. So I'm taking Dustin Johnson.
Totally fair. I like Justin Thomas, who I haven't mentioned as one of the favorites because I wanted to save him for here. I saw another cool stat from him. He's improved every single Masters he's played in his career. He went from 39th, 22nd, 17th, 12th, and then he was 4th last year at the Masters. So to me, that's very impressive, kind of a very cool stat. And it almost just seems like fate that he's going to be in that top 3. And certainly, he's a good enough golfer, so I'm not just basing this off fate. But for me, Justin Thomas is my guy. I think he's going to win his first green jacket. His odds are 10-1. Vegas obviously likes him. But he's my pick, and I think he's going to take home the green jacket. So I think that's going to do it here for our show today. We got a lot. We definitely covered a lot over the last hour and a half between the national championship and college basketball, Sam Darnold and the Jets in the upcoming draft, the Nets and their injuries, the MLB season, and then obviously Masters weekend. Love talking to the golf fan out the show. Spring is here, and let me tell you, it's awesome. I hope you enjoyed tonight's show as much as I did. It's been a pleasure. I'm Sam Davis with Mike Calamari, Alex Bowles doing the production. One-on-One is a production of WFUV Sports. The director of WFUV Sports is Bobby Schafferdini. Thank you for joining us. Have a great night.